Hi guys, welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. So my introduction is that this is 365 days of reading. You're reading through the Bible in 1 year. It is a chronological reading using the 1 Year Chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online at the 1 Year Chronological Bible reading. The 1 Year Chronological Bible online.com. So today we are at day 108. This is 108. This is April 17th. And we are reading 1 Samuel 23:13 through 25, and then Psalm 54. And so essentially today is like two sort of stories in David's life, and then the Psalm sort of in between telling you where he is. But my very quick introduction, I'm hoping, so if you are with me for the first time, I'm trying to give a very, very brief background. If you have been with me since the beginning, we're going to move into this quickly because I can't go too far in the back. If you have never been with me before and you read today and you feel blessed by today, I would love if you went back to the beginning to build up your foundation so you understand exactly who David is, where he came from, and obviously why that matters. So we are smack in the middle of where King David and King Saul are. So David is anointed king and yet not king at the time. King Saul has sort of lost. He's definitely lost he's lost the Holy Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit has left him. He's suffering with evil spirits, and yet he's still king in Israel. He's still considered king. So the two of them are semi sort of in battle. Saul is chasing David. So David isn't really battling Saul, but Saul is battling David. And what happened to the Israelite people is that they were having problems with everybody in the land that they left living in the land. And instead of taking everybody out as God told them to do, they were all still living in there. And then they were slowly starting to rise up and they were fighting against the Israelite people, which tends to be the pattern. And then the Israelites, God would appoint someone that would lead them. So someone that he called a judge, and that judge would deliver the Israelite people or bring the Israelite people back into a place of high position. And then this cycle would start all over again. It got to the point where it was so bad that people were like, the Philistines are taking us over. They were in war, they were in battle, they weren't coming together. And so they just wanted a king and they begged for a king. God told them having a king was not good. And he said, but if that's still what you want, then I will give you what you guys asked for. I'm just going to line you up and let you know what's coming. And they said that is still what they want. They want it to be like the rest of the world, which is in and of itself exactly what God said he did not want the people of Israelite to be like, but they said that they did. They wanted to be like the rest of the world. And so they wanted a king just like everybody else. They got a king. It is King Saul. And very soon after Saul was in his kingship, he was leading the people. He turned away from God and he didn't follow his spiritual leader, who was Samuel. He didn't follow the prophet at the time. And so he was taken, not taken out of his kinship, but someone else was sort of put up in his place and anointed as king, and that was David. And now he's really jealous of David. David is younger. David is a better warrior. David beat Goliath. So at this point, David has already beat Goliath. David is a man that loves God and is after God's own heart. So we're going to find that this is in the area where David's running. So David has lived in the caves of Adullam with about 400 men. Men are coming to him sort of in droves. They are coming to him and he's leading the people. He went into the town of Keilah and he saved them from the Philistines. There was a battle there. And so he and his men saved them. And yet Keilah was still willing to turn him over to Saul. So he found out from God that the townspeople were going to turn him over. And so now he is running again. He is running out of Keilah. And so it says in verse 13, which is where we're going to begin. Verse 13, Samuel 23, verse 13, 1 Samuel 23. It says, so David and his men, about 600, so they're about 600 at this point, left Keilah and kept moving from place to place. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he didn't even bother going there. So Saul was like, he found out that he escaped, so he didn't bother going. So David now is kind of wandering with 600 people, which is a huge amount of people, wandering from place to place. And Saul continues to search for him with his men. So it says in verse 15, while David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come to take his life. He knew that he kept chasing him, but he found out he was kind of close. And then Jonathan, who is Saul's son, came to meet David. So funny enough that Saul didn't know where um, David was, but his son Jonathan knew where he was. So it just shows either that God was continually protecting David, which could absolutely be the truth, or it showed how much Jonathan loved David and how much David trusted Jonathan in order to allow Jonathan to know exactly where they were, right? Because there was a covenant between the two of them. So even though he was Saul's son, and even though there was probably a greater chance of him being leading the people if Saul remained king, he trusted David. And so he loved David. He trusted David. They had a covenant together. He recognized, sadly, I'm sure it broke his heart, that he recognized that Saul was doing the wrong thing. He was doing the thing against against the Lord's anointed, who was David. And so, anyway, so he comes up and he's kind of with David. And he says, once again, we hear the two of them in verse 17. It says, the two of them made a covenant with the Lord. So then in verse 19, the Ziphites go up to Saul at Gibeah and they told him where David was hiding out. So Jonathan is protecting him, but then other people were giving him up. So these Ziphites gave him up, and he said, Saul. So then Saul says, find out more information about them. Tell me exactly where they are, and then you'll be rewarded. He says, then I'm going to go with you. If he's in the area, I'll track him down among the clans of Judah. So they set out, and so it's like, so verse 26, it says, Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side of the mountain. So in some ways, it reminds me of like a cartoon where they're sort of like just chasing each other around the mountain. Never can they really seem to, well, David's running. So it's not like David's trying to catch up with Saul. David's running, and Saul is chasing after him. So in verse 26, it says, Saul was going along one side of the mountain. David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul. As they were closing in, somebody came and said, hey, you got to go protect your people. The Philistines are attacking. So at this point where he's almost about to get him, Philistines attack and he gets taken away. Again, we start talking about the providence of the Lord, right? David has cried out to the Lord. He's asked for protection from the Lord. Right now, it doesn't mean that the Lord is going to take out Saul. It just means at this point, it just means that he is still being protected. So even though he's running, the Lord is still keeping Saul from catching him. So then we move right into Psalm 54. So he's running for his life. He's being chased by Saul. He loved that family. He loves Jonathan. And so in verse 1, it says, save me, O God, by your name. Vindicate me by your might. So he doesn't just want his life to be saved, but he wants to be vindicated, understanding that he's after the Lord, right? That there is a truth and an honesty to what he's doing. He's not running because he did the wrong thing in the Lord's eyes, or even in Saul's eyes, to be real. He didn't even do anything where Saul should be destroying him. So he says, to vindicate me, O Lord. Foes are attacking him. And then in going down into verse 6, it says, I will sacrifice a free will offering in your name. So he's asking for these things. But if you guys remember, and I hope you do, I hope you read this, because it gives this grounding, right? A free will offering is sort of exactly what it sounds like. He's just offering to the Lord because he loves the Lord. So he's giving sacrificially of whatever it is that he had. There were offerings that they needed to make, right? So there were yearly offerings and, festival offerings, and there were all kinds of things sin offerings that they needed to make. This was because he loved the Lord. So he just gave extra because he loved the Lord. So he says, I will sacrifice a free will offering to you. I will praise your name, Lord, because it is good. And so again, he's just giving all honor and all glory to the Lord. So remembering in our times of pain and despair and sadness, right? The Lord is still good and he's still worthy to be praised. And then in verse 7, he says, I will sacrifice, right? So he's going to sacrifice this free will offering. And then in verse 7, it says, you have delivered me. So we go back to this past tense. So future tense, I'm going to give you this free will offering. Past tense, he says, you have delivered me from all your troubles, and my eyes have looked in triumph on my foes. So he could be talking about past triumphs, quite possibly, right? He could be talking because In the past, he saved him from so many things. He continues to save him from Saul, who's chasing him in the wilderness. So that could be what he's talking about, right? Even though he also says in verse 1, present tense, save me. So is this idea of continual saving, like he continues to need to be saved? Or is this idea of where he has a confidence, or is it both, right? So I want to kind of wrap up that it could be both. Is there a confidence in that he says that the Lord will save him, right? He has delivered him from all of his troubles. So is there a confidence that in the future he recognizes and knows that he has delivered him from all of his troubles? So just these ideas of working in tense, I don't think he was not understanding English, right? So as we would say now, like if you write a poem now, or if you write a letter, you certainly don't want to change tenses unless you're telling a story, which, right, then that would say to the author, like, oh, or the reader, like, oh, that happened before, right? So just trying to understand what David is saying. Is this current things that he needs to be saved of, and he recognizes that the Lord has already done it because the Lord is good? Or is this that he's talking about being saved from Saul? And I'm going to venture a guess that it might be a mixture of both, right? The Lord has protected him and has saved him, and so he will recognize that the Lord will continue to save him and already has saved him in the future. So that's sort of that's a possibility, right? That's certainly a possibility that that's what it is. All right. Now, moving on to chapter 24, so 1 Samuel 24, going right into that first verse, it says, after Saul returned from, another reading moment. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told that David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David. He came to the sheep pens, and there's a cave there, and he goes to relieve himself. Not getting too personal. Maybe he's there for a little while. But while he's in there, guess whose cave it happens to be? David's cave. David is in there. David sees him in there, and they all start urging him to kill David. God has put him in your hands. And I wanted to finish the sentence because I have struggled with this chapter more than I can tell you. And I feel as if in some ways my struggle is my own, because I think I know what's good and I know what David should have done, and he didn't do it. And so this time around, I'm trying to reckon with why he didn't do it. And so sort of, again, going through this chronologically, I'm trying in my heart to understand the heart of David, not just necessarily what he says, but a lot of the background of what he always does and how he's been in the past, right? We see that he's got confidence, but he's not necessarily cocky. We see that he is a warrior, but he's not the biggest of all men, right? So he really, really loves the Lord. And so trying to kind of mix all of those things together in my understanding of who David is helps me understand the story. So the story is this. Saul goes in the cave. Saul goes to the bathroom. He's in a very sensitive, precarious position where he probably couldn't defend himself, right? I'm sure he's really going to the bathroom, right? So he's relieving himself. So they see him easily. He could be taken out. David knows all these caves. He's been living in them. His guys are like, this is your moment. And on top of that, they go, God gave him to you. I've seen this, right? In my perspective, I go, God gave him to him. Why didn't he take him out? This was exactly what God was waiting for, and he actually turned from God and didn't do that. But I'm pulling that all back in a little bit because David loves God. David does not want to kill Saul because Saul is God's anointed king, and God has not taken Saul out, right? And so David's like, who am I? I'm not going to take, he's not an enemy of the Lord at this point. And we know that the Holy Spirit has left him, but he hasn't proclaimed it. He's still leading the Israelite people. He's still leading God's chosen people. And so David is very adamant about not taking him out, but he cuts off a piece of his robe. But even when he cuts off a piece of his robe, he actually feels guilty about it. So he's so in love with the Lord and doing what the Lord has chosen Saul, right, to be king. And David probably believes that God will put David in place when he wants to put David in the place of king. So I'm saying that this is my perspective of it. So I want to be very clear. I know that there are probably a couple of different ways that you can look at this. This is just a perspective in reading it a few times and really just trying to understand David, what I believe that the perspective is. But again, it's just me. So going to verse 8, it says, David went out of the cave and called to Saul. So after he did that, he goes, and remember, he rebukes his men. So he yells at his guys. He's like, he's the anointed one. So he calls to him and he says, my Lord, and maybe this is what God wanted, right? He says, my Lord, the king. And so Saul looks back and he sees David. And what does David do? David bows down in front of him because he recognizes that he's still the king. And he's still the king because God has left him there, right? So he is still the king. So there is an honor to the position that he is in as God's anointed king over God's chosen people. And so he bows down to him. And then he sort of like pleads with him. Why are you listening to other people? Why would you think that I'm going to harm you? When have I ever tried to harm you? Why is this kind of getting in your ear and getting stuck that I want to harm you, that you would come out and kill me? So he says, I will not lay my hand on the Lord. See my father. And he gives him this honor. He technically is his father, by the way. He's his father-in-law because he's married to his daughter. So he's technically his father. Again, in my opinion, I think it's a little bit more than that. If I take David on his word, I think it's a little bit more than that. He's referencing the honor of fathering him. He's over him in the military, right? I'm sure there's a right word that I don't know, but in leadership, he's over top of him, and I'm sure he has guided him through battles and all those kinds of things. And so there's an honor that he's bestowing to him, and a gentleness by calling him father, right? So he calls him Lord, he calls him father, he calls himself servant, right? So he's giving all of these honors to Saul just to remind him, like, I'm not bent on hurting you, harming you, or taking you out of this kingship. He said, there's nothing to indicate in my hand that I am guilty of wrongdoing. May the Lord judge between you and me. And this is why I keep thinking, like, David really just keeps putting the Lord first. May the Lord judge between you and me. May the Lord avenge the wrongs that you have done me. So he's recognizing even in this that Saul has been dirty to him, right? But let the Lord handle that. I'm not going to go in there and I'm not going to do anything. Let the Lord handle all this for me, which is why he keeps asking him in his Psalms, Lord, vindicate me. Lord, save me. You have saved me from wrongdoing, right? And he says, may the Lord avenge my wrongdoing. And then in verse 13, as the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds. So my hands won't touch you. He refuses to do an evil thing and work against what he considers what the Lord did. So, and then verse 15, it says, may the Lord, once again, may the Lord be the judge between us. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. So 16, when David finished saying this, Saul asked, is that your voice? So we see this like moment of Saul's, like, it clicks, right? And he's like, is that you? He said, David, my son. And then he weeps, he cries. He says, you are more righteous than I. So we hope that there's a recognition in there that Saul's like, I have messed up and I love you and I'm not going to do anything against you. So he says, you have just told me about the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you didn't kill me. When a man finds an enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way that you treated me today. And then he's like, I know you're going to be king, because he recognizes that it's coming. So then David gives an oath to Saul. And then Saul goes home and David and his men go back to the stronghold. But then when we go right into the next chapter, it says, Samuel dies and Israel assembles and mourns for him, and they buried him. So all of Israel goes and mourns for him. And then we're kind of going into a different area, right? So this is how he ends with Saul. At this point, it may look like it's kind of going up in a way that maybe Saul is starting to recognize all the wrongdoing that he's doing. We don't know, but what we do know is this, David still isn't home. So it's not like David went home after this. So then we find this situation with him and this guy, Nabal. So David goes in, and again, a great understanding of the past to understand what's happening here, right? So the past before them, to understand what's happening here. So David goes down with his 600 men, okay? And David is in this rich guy's area. So he's not on the land of this guy Nabal. He's not on the land, but he's outside of the land with all of his men. And what we find out is they're kind of patrolling the area. So this and again, if you've been with me, you read the book of Ruth. So it starts making me think of like Boaz in some way, right? Like they've got a huge amount of property, lots of people employed on their property. They're all doing work on the property. Well, they have thousands of sheep and hundreds of this and right, thousands of that. So all of these animals are out roaming the property. So just think about how big this area is. And they have David and all of his warriors protecting the area. Now, he didn't ask for David and the warriors to protect the area. So obviously, let's be clear on that. But they are doing it. So they recognize that the place is big. They're helping the servants along so nobody comes in and kind of steals an animal here or there, right? So they're offering, their jobs are warriors, right? They're not farm people. So they are warriors, all the people that are with David. So they're really doing a job that they're not being paid to do, but that they're doing as sort of a blessing to the area in which they live, right? So I want to look at it that way because I think that's the way that David looks at it. David says, we've protected this area. It's not where we live, but we've protected it from other people coming in. Now, it says right in the beginning, so we notice that Nabal is kind of not great. And his wife, Abigail, is. She's very smart. She's kind. Let's say she was intelligent and beautiful. So these are two things that go really well together. Her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. So he is not good, right? So he doesn't have these great qualities that she has. So he goes up. It's festival time. Again, he's out there protecting the area. It's festival time. He's got a whole bunch of people. They have a lot of money and a lot of food. And he's like, hey, it would be great if you shared with us. Now, this is why I say to go back to go forward. So what we've seen and what we've noted through what Boaz did, and then through a lot of the literal stuff that we read in Deuteronomy, Numbers, and Leviticus, is that if you had, your responsibility was to share with those who did not have. Right. So remember, during like the time of Jubilee, they gave back land, they gave back their slaves, they had these big festivals, they gave their food. They were only supposed to take up so much of the property as theirs. They were supposed to let everybody else kind of enjoy the edges of their property and their food on the edges of their property. So there was this semblance of community that I'm going to say that we probably don't necessarily understand at this point, but maybe if you think of some really close knit friends or family that you have, and let's just say you have the huge house, you'd probably tend to have parties at your house. Or if you're the one who, I'm just trying to think of anything else. If you're really good on working with cars, you might be the one to offer your services to your cousin who is having problems with his car, right? Like things like that. So when you have in a community, you're supposed to help. There's a blessing to helping those that don't have. Clearly, these guys don't have, these warriors on the outside edge, right? They don't have. What they do have, they're giving abundantly. What they do have is they have the power to protect, and they're giving abundantly to the people around them, right? Nabal is like, who are you? And so here comes some of the rub as well. Nabal's like, their servants come and say, hey, David's out there. He's protecting us. He's looking for food. Who's this guy, David? Well, let's get real. If we see his wife later in the chapter, I think it's in like verse 28, she knows exactly who he is. So she even knows who he is to the point where if you read verse 29, it says, let's go, even though someone is pursuing you to take your life. So she recognizes that he's being pursued by Saul, right? So I assume everyone in the area knows that, right? They might not necessarily know where they are, but they know that they're being chased. And remember, everyone was singing songs about David, right? Saul slays his thousands, David slays his 10,000. So everybody knew he was in some ways the vice president. I mean, I'm using that on shaky ground, but he was a well-known person in Israel. So she says, even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. So she's kind of saying he's with God. But the lives of your enemies, ready for this, will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. She even knows the story of David and Goliath. I'm assuming by using this expression, right? So I'm assuming she recognizes that he shot him with a sling and he killed Goliath in this way. So she knows details about David that we have to assume Nabal knows as well. Now, again, I'm making an assumption, right? It doesn't say Nabal knows David. She knows David, right? But going from context clues, it seems like they both very much know who David is. They very much understand the power of David. And it's not like Nabal says, listen, this guy's against Saul, so we're not going to give him food. He doesn't. He pretends like he's a nobody. And so David is highly insulted. And so David is like, we're going to come front and we're going to slaughter every single man in this area. Now, I don't even want to say that that's, he should have been doing that. Like, I'm going to pull back and go, that probably wasn't a godly thing to do. He probably let his emotions get in the way. But what we do see is then a servant comes, speaks to Abigail, right? The wife, Nabal's wife, Abigail, and says, this is what's happening. I hear this is going on. David's going to come in. He's going to kill everybody. And she kind of freaks out. And she's like, pull out all this food and let me go and let me meet David, right? So they pull out all this food to share with them, right? So the servants bring out all this food. And by the way, the servants confirmed that that David was protecting them. And Nabal, in his nastiness and surliness and mean dealings, he was like, I don't even trust the servants that I have. So he didn't even trust what the servants said. Abigail did. So when the servants came to her and said, David did all this stuff for us, Abigail trusted and understood that they were telling the truth, probably because she was intelligent and she probably knew her servants a little bit better than her husband did. But anyway, so they bring all this food, they take it out to David, they catch David on the way of coming in. And again, what does she do? She bows down to him. She prostrates herself before him. She shows him an honor. She calls him herself servant, and she calls him Lord. She has full recognition of who he is and what he did. And she offers him food. And he is so grateful to her that she says, just remember me. And he says, I will do that. So he's grateful and honor. And then he says in verse 33, let's go back to verse 32. David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you to me today. So he's praising the Lord for sending Abigail to him. Why? May you be blessed for your good judgment, right? And for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. And so he is blessing her for being so smart that she kept him from being hot-headed, essentially, right? And doing damage because he was hot-headed and angry because he felt insulted. And so she's really bestowed a wonderful honor in this way. And then then he goes back, they enjoy the food, and then she goes home and she doesn't tell Nabal he's having a party, he's getting drunk, whatever, he's all by himself. And so then he goes to bed. Next morning she tells him, and it says he was like a stone, and so maybe he was in a coma or whatever. But as soon as she told him, something happened to him where he was unable to move, and then 10 days later he died. So then after that, David decides to marry Abigail. He's already got one wife, so this will be his second wife. Michal, I think is the way I pronounce her name. She is also his wife. However, she has been given to somebody else. So in verse 44, it says, Saul has given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, someone who was in Galim, who I think was in Benjamin. He was either in Benjamin or Judah. The areas are tough. Geographically, I'm not the most geographical genius, but it's kind of in that area of Benjamin. So he might be a Benjaminite. Benjaminite. So anyway, Saul gave her, who was David's first wife, gave her away. But David still now has two wives. I don't know what to do with that, but he still has two wives. And so she was happy. She said, I'm your servant, and she's ready to serve you and wash his feet. So she is, again, honoring him and glorifying him. So that's how we end today. So I think we ended on a good note. I think it was another good day ending on a good note. And so if you like this and it was a blessing to you, I want you to literally like it, hit the like button, share it with other people, subscribe to the channel, read with somebody else, grab someone, read your Bible together. If you have hit this point and you are continuing to read, guys, I'm so encouraged and so excited. I know a lot of you have been sticking with me, and so I'm thrilled about that. And I hope that you are continuing to grow in your love for the Lord. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Keep reading.